When we think of the Viking Age, we often envision monumental runestones or splendid ships, and forget that most surviving art appears as animal art on utilitarian objects. Animal art is a form of decoration that features predominantly animal motifs, sometimes combined with anthropomorphic beings. A traditional problem in archaeological scholarship has been the tendency to view foreign art through Western eyes. Such assumptions create difficulties when we encounter traditions that do not conform to Western conventions. Together with a limited understanding of handicraft, a contemptuous attitude, and inconsistent terminology, this has produced a muddled scholarship that has long obscured the true meanings and different functions of this pictorial heritage. Modern art historians usually distinguish between three main pictorial functions. Pictorial narratives depict action, movement, or an event unfolding, such as a person crossing the street. Pictorial symbols are images that signify something beyond themselves, such as a cross representing Christianity. Decoration refers to repetitive patterns, for instance, wallpaper, that appear to lack deeper meaning, at least at first sight. But as we shall see shortly, this tripartite distinction makes less sense when applied to the art of the Viking Age. Let us begin with the carved panel from the Oseberg wagon in Norway. It presents images that do not fit neatly into our distinction between narrative and decor. In one part of the panel, we see what appears to be a female figure clasping the hand of a male figure holding a knife. Is she stopping him or handing him the weapon? That remains open to debate. Another clearly narrative scene is the rider on horseback. Riding implies movement and direction, which aligns well with our modern idea of narrative in visual art. But the panel also moves into what a repetitive pattern. Here we see a chain of beasts arranged in similar postures across the surface. That resembles decoration. Yet these beasts also bite and grip one another, so even the decor contains a narrative component. This should serve as an eye-opener. Viking Age art does not always fit easily into methods developed mainly for Western art. The next question is how animal art developed over time in strictly stylistic terms. By style, I mean the formal mode in which motifs are rendered and visually coded, rather than what they depict or signify. In this sense, the same motif may occur in different styles, just as the same text may appear in handwriting, typewriting, or digital script. Such stylistic distinctions have long been important in archaeology, since they allow scholars to date objects from their stylistic coding. Germanic-speaking peoples seem to have abandoned representational imagery for a long period. Earlier traditions had shown people, boats, and beasts, especially in the Bronze Age, but later much of that disappeared. A millennium later, around the year 300, in the borderlands of the Roman Empire and beyond, beasts reappear in a new and much more stylized form. This marks the beginning of Germanic animal art. The likely impulse came from contact with the Roman world, where people regularly represented humans, beasts, and mythological beings on everyday objects. Germanic peoples had extensive contact with the empire, including mercenaries who served in the Roman army and later returned north. Through such contact, pictorial representation was reintroduced into Germanic-speaking regions. The northern versions, however, developed according to local tastes. They became much more stylized. In later phases, especially after the decline of the Western Roman Empire, four-legged beasts became increasingly abstract. Bodies were divided into segments, each with internal ornament, and the animals were packed into dense surface compositions. Toward the end of the migration period, around 550, a new aesthetic emerged, ribbon style. In this mode of representation, the animal body was no longer built up from separate segments, but from interlacing ribbons, a construction principle that may ultimately derive from the Eastern Mediterranean. This style developed further during the Merovingian period, better known in Sweden as the Vendel era. By the beginning of the Viking Age, around 750, the ribbon principle continued in an even more stylized form. At this point, body parts can be difficult to identify unless the viewer is trained to do so. Early Viking Age art includes ribbon-shaped beasts with double outlines, elongated limbs, and a high degree of abstraction. At the same time, a radically new figure appears, the gripping beast. This creature often has a round head and paws that grip the frame, other animals, or even itself, hence its peculiar name. Gripping beasts seem to represent a distinct Scandinavian innovation toward three-dimensionality, whereas earlier beasts were primarily rendered as surface-bound compositions. During the Middle Viking Age, approximately 850 to 1000, this increasing preference for three-dimensional compositions left a clear mark on metal casting. A striking example is the large equal-armed brooch from Gniezdovo in Russia. Heavy, elaborate, and seemingly conceived as a conversation piece, intended to be removed from the dress and passed around. And yet, several modes of representation appear simultaneously, both three-dimensional and flat. These include gripping beasts with compact, often pretzel-shaped bodies, ribbon-shaped beasts, now more compact and frequently S-shaped, and birds, such as those seen on the mammon axe, whose looping feathers may also serve as useful chronological indicators. Around the year 1000, at the beginning of the late Viking Age, much remains the same, except that the gripping beast disappears. Meanwhile, body parts become more exaggerated. Manes and tails sprout organic, almost vegetal forms. Heads become smaller, eyes may become almond-shaped, and the whole composition becomes more elongated and asymmetrical. This development reaches its peak in the urn style, where everything is drawn into elegant, elongated forms. The style is highly refined and has become iconic in modern ideas of Viking art. One theory relates this late pictorial style to social and political tensions surrounding land inheritance and the church. As Christian institutions sought to appropriate ancestral family lands through appeals to Latin legal principles of ownership, the affected families may have responded by reviving older visual traditions and imitating the visual language of their heirlooms in order to assert the precedence of tradition over foreign ideas that challenged the established order. Eventually, animal art in Scandinavia faded during the medieval period, merging with Romanesque traditions from Central Europe. So far, then, on animal art in terms of stylistic development. As stated before, a recurring problem in archaeology and has been the tendency to view ancient art through Western eyes. Early researchers often connected images on rune stones and picture stones with myths and heroic tales, but by the late 19th century, such readings were increasingly dismissed as unscientific. This shift reflected new colonial prejudices that so-called primitive peoples, such as the tribal Vikings, had not reached a cultural level at which pictures could carry meaning. Instead, scholars maintain that visual art should be used primarily as evidence for dating objects and tracing their geographical or social origin. But as we have seen, Nordic animal art operates according to principles that do not align neatly with Western categories such as narrative, symbol, and pure decor. Moreover, each chronological stage of its development contains compositions that seem to carry symbolic or narrative significance. Animal art, then, is not merely decoration, but a complex visual language shaped by materials, gestures, historical transformation, and cultural meaning. The most important lesson, perhaps, is that if we want to understand Viking Age art, we must resist forcing it into the conceptual frameworks of the Western world, and instead develop methods that broaden our horizons by, in a sense, going native. By this, I mean the practice of combining sensory engagement and embodied perception with analytical reflection, rather than reducing interpretation to a formalized act of intellectual dissection.